tell Mr. President yet that during that era, inflation spiked. During that era, jobs were lost. During that era, the economic growth level dipped. That era wasn't the best of eras in economic progress. What did not work in 1984 cannot possibly be a solution in a global economy that's ever much more integrated, where the vulnerabilities of the global economy immediately register within the local economy. So, what have we seen in the nearly 1 year of our president still holding to the idea that the command and control approach is a better source of discipline in the allocation of scarce resources? Inflation has gone up to nearly 13%. So for the first time, we have lost the single digit. Another thing that has happened is that economic growth rate has dipped below the population growth rate. The last economic growth rate for 2015 is just a little above 2%. Jobs are being lost because companies are suddenly finding themselves unable to access important resource of foreign exchange to enable production. What is good about the ideas of the president? One thing that is good about it is actually that the president comes into this economic philosophy on the premise that he does not want the poor to suffer. I can relate to that. A leader must not want the poor to suffer, especially a leader who knows that most of his vote came not from the elite, but from the poor. The problem, though, is that the intention and the outcome have diverged. Because, unfortunately, the weakest and the most vulnerable suffer the impact of inflation the most. When companies need to squeeze labor, the first set of people that must go are in that class. So, my pitch today is for our president to sit with his team and to look at the economic evidence that speaks loudly. It is time to sit back and review the well-intended idea of a command and control economic principle. It's time to do what the Americans say: if it ain't broken, don't fix it. The macroeconomic stability of this country was hard won. It took plenty of work to get to the point where Nigeria could be considered as having relative macroeconomic stability. What we're doing with the command and control approach, with the central bank suddenly having enormous power to determine losers and winners is that the same government that has a very strong anti-corruption agenda finds itself unwittingly, or in fact, wittingly, being purveyor of discretionary allocation, where enormous power is being abused as a result of unmonitored, opaque, uncertain, unpredictable, inefficient, and ineffective allocation. So, we need to rethink in the present the monetary policy of the administration. Actually, the monetary policy was relatively safeguarded from political domination. It would do well to give a semblance of autonomy back to the central bank, so that the central bank would speak the language of economics and not this language of rhetorics and language of anecdotes and language of suppositions that are no longer premised on hard economic facts. It's important that the central bank would retrace itself and get back in right monetary policy making. It's crucial. If we lost that, it's going to be tough to regain it. On the fiscal side, everyone has seen the level of budget confusion that we have had. There's absolutely no need for that kind of confusion. We need that the legislature and the executive would sort the budget situation out instantly. The problem with delaying the process of spending in an economy where government is big is that the delivery of basic services to the poor is suffering. Many of you seated here are elite. You might not know it, but any time that the health centers don't work, we lose mothers who are giving birth unnecessarily in 2016. How can we be losing mothers at childbirth? We lose children. We can't afford to have some political paralysis that creates an economic logjam. It must be sorted. And then there must be an important conversation on the true fiscal situation of our land. Public finance is a mess simply because in the last years of huge rentals or rents from oil, as a matter of fact, we calculated that $690 billion since 1999 was earned from oil alone. Does this nation look like a nation that earns $690 billion from oil? The poor governance of oil resources has become an important trigger point for a necessary conversation between the citizens of this country and those that govern them. The level of rascality that we have seen in the many gates that have surfaced tells us that fiscal rectitude is key and fundamental for accelerating the economic progress of this country. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact is, after $690 billion in oil rent, 36 states in our country, some 24 of them, or thereabout, had to depend on a bailout from a federal government, which itself, in the time of plenty, was already borrowing to pay salaries. Now the